Within the blockhouse, we all stood to our posts ready for battle. One shot had warned us of the pirates' presence. How long before the full attack? "Lads," said the captain quietly, "we're outnumbered, that you all know. But we fight in shelter, and I hope with discipline. I've no manner of doubt that we can drub 'em if you choose. Now toss out the fire, the chill is past, and we mustn't have smoke in our eyes." Quickly the captain's orders were obeyed, and we stood to once more. Not a breath of air moved through the trees. They stood tall and motionless, their thick foliage hanging limp in the hot sun that now fell with all its might upon the clearing. In the background, the surf boomed along the beaches. All around us was the heavy murmur of insects. And so we waited, scanning the trees for any sight of them, listening intent for any sound that might give them away. But nothing did we hear. Inside the blockhouse, the heat was now intense. We stood beside the loopholes, jackets and coats flung aside, shirts thrown open at the neck and rolled up to the shoulders. Each man was at his post, in a fever of heat and anxiety. The silence was broken at last by Joyce, who turned to face the captain. "If you please, sir, if I see anyone, am I to fire?" "Of course, man, you know that," replied the captain. "Thank you, sir," returned Joyce with the same quiet civility. And with that he calmly raised his musket, took aim, and fired.
Cover on your right! Cover on your right! Come on, back! Push over there and go! Right, I've covered it, George. I've covered it. Watch the next one.
The first attack ended abruptly, and as the smoke cleared away and vanished, the wood around us looked as empty as before. Not a bough waved, not the gleam of a musket barrel betrayed the presence of our foes, whose bullets, though striking the log house, had injured no one. The captain, standing in the center of the room, took stock. "It's more serious than I thought. They've a supply of muskets that we knew nothing of. Now, all of you, tell me how many shots were fired. Dr. Livesey?" "I know precisely," said the doctor. "There were 3 on this side. I saw 2 flashes close together and 1 farther to the west." "Only 3. And how many on yours, Mr. Trelawney?" But this was not so easily answered. There had come many from the north, too many to count. And yet from the east and west only a single shot had been fired. It was plain that the attack would be developed from the north, and that on the other 3 sides we were only to be annoyed by a show of hostilities. But we had little time left to us for thought. The pirates leapt from the trees on the north side and now ran straight towards the stockade. At the same moment, fire opened again from the woods. A constant fire, evidence that each man was supplied with several muskets. Rifle ball now sang through the doorway and the loopholes with alarming accuracy. It forced us to take shelter and allowed the advancing pirates to cover the ground unhindered. And a murderous bunch they were, each one wanting the treasure, each one prepared to kill for it. They swarmed over the fence like monkeys, and as they did so, we fired into their midst. 3 men fell, 1 forward into the enclosure, 2 back on the outside. But 4 survived, and shouting foul oaths, they closed in on the blockhouse. "Out, lads, and fight them in the open," called the captain. And drawing our cutlasses, we ran from the smoke-filled cabin. In the first minutes of the fighting, the pirates held the advantage. We'd left the gloom of the blockhouse to be blinded by the sun and forced back by the sudden onslaught. But now we made ground, as all round in the smoke of battle, the cries and groans, the flashes and reports of pistols added to the confusion. I saw the doctor flooring one man with a great slash across the face. Then I looked up and had barely time to jump aside as another leapt at me with his cutlass. At the back of the house, two pirates threw themselves at the captain. Just in time, we saved him from a sure death. And then the battle was suddenly over. It had seemed like an hour. It had been but minutes. And as the last injured pirate fled the stockade, all that remained of them were the bodies. The mutineers had lost 5 men in all. 4 bodies lay within the compound and 1 without. The remaining 2 men, both wounded, had made good their escape. But our own party had suffered too. Hunter lay dead at the entrance to the blockhouse, his skull crushed by blows from a musket butt. Joyce lay within, shot through the head, never to move again. Our captain, barely conscious, was propped in one corner. Blood streamed from his head and thigh, and his shoulder blade was broken. But the doctor proclaimed that with care, he would survive. The rest of us were cut, bleeding, bruised, and battered, though, thank God, not seriously injured. Mercifully, there was no return of the mutineers that day, not so much as another shot out of the woods. They too, it seems, were licking their wounds, and thank God for it, for we were in a sorry state and would not have survived another attack that morning. As it was, we prepared our defenses once more, and then, sadly, buried poor Hunter and Joyce. We had lost 3 men in the blockhouse. Only 4 of us now remained, plus our injured captain, and our spirits were low. Shortly after noon, however, there was a strange occurrence. The doctor, who'd been counseling with the squire and Captain Trelawney, armed himself to the teeth, put our precious chart in his pocket, and left the stockade on the north side. Gray and I had been sitting together at the far end of the blockhouse, and the doctor's action amazed us both. Why, in the name of Davy Jones! The doctor's mad, or I am. Why, no, says I. He's about the last of this crew for madness, Mr. Gray. I've an idea the doctor is off to see Ben Gunn. And so the thought grew in me that I too should take some positive action and not just sit around and wait. My scheme was to go down to the White Rock and see whether or not it was there that Ben Gunn had hidden his boat. I was certain I'd never be allowed to leave the enclosure. Indeed, it was madness, for it would leave but 2 sound men to guard the house. But I was only a boy, and my mind was made up. Thus I waited for the right moment, and when the coast was clear, I made a bolt for it, over the stockade and into the thickest of the trees. I'd taken with me a brace of pistols, powder horn and bullets, and in my pockets a few biscuits to keep me going. I took my way straight for the east coast of the island, for I was determined to avoid all chance of observation from the anchorage. It was already late afternoon, and as I moved nearer to the shore, so cool draughts of air began to reach me through the trees. A few steps further, and I came forth into the open borders of the grove, and saw the sea lying blue and sunny to the horizon, and the surf tumbling and tossing its foam along the beach. The sight and sound of these great rollers has always remained with me, and I scarce believe there is one spot on the island where a man would be out of earshot of their noise. One happy memory at least of that cursed island. But then I headed south along the beach until I reached a point where I could see through the trees to the anchorage. There, under the lee of Skeleton Island, lay the Hispaniola, in water as calm as when we'd first entered it. There was little I could do in daylight. Any move I made towards the White Rock would be clearly seen from the ship. So, making myself comfortable, I waited for evening. When the dusk came, I moved swiftly down to the White Rock, a lone sentinel surrounded by scrub and grass. And there, in a small hollow of green turf, I found Ben Gunn's boat. Homemade if ever anything was. A rude, lopsided framework of tough wood, and stretched upon that a covering of goatskin with the hair inside. What now? Should I return to the blockhouse, or could I make use of this frail craft? Then suddenly the thought struck me. The Hispaniola was the pirates' trump card. They could sail away in her at any time. And after their drubbing of the stockade that morning, such a move might be very close to their hearts. Why not slip out to her during the night, cut her adrift, and let her go ashore where she fancied? I made up my mind to do this very thing. As the last of the daylight disappeared, so a heavy fog rolled in from the southeast, and all I could see now was the glow of firelight from the pirates' camp, and a mere blur of light from the ship. The conditions were ideal for my plan. Ben Gunn's coracle was the most cross-grained, lopsided craft to manage. Do as you pleased, she always made more leeway than anything else, and turning round and round was the maneuver she was best at. Were it not for the tide, I should not have made the ship at all. But as it was, I was swept down, until there, looming out of the fog, I saw the Hispaniola right in my path, and hardly to be missed. She loomed before me, a large, dark mass. Then her spars and hull began to take shape, and the next moment the brisk current swept me alongside her hawser, which I grabbed tightly with both hands. The hawser was as taut as a bowstring, pulling hard on the anchor, and all round in the blackness the rippling current bubbled and chattered like a mountain stream. But there was another sound. From aboard the Hispaniola came the sound of drunken voices, quarreling.
Stand back, I tell you! By thunder, I'll take me knife!
I smiled to myself. So much the better for my plan, I thought, if those aboard were drunk and fighting. Then, for a moment, a breath of wind caused the hawser to slacken in my hand. I took out my knife and cut through the strands one after another, until at last it was through. The Hispaniola moved immediately, spinning slowly across the current. As she turned away, I heard the pirates ashore singing, and I wondered if they'd be so happy in the morning. I glanced towards their fire, and on doing so, my feeling of elation drained from me. The firelight had been to my right. Now it was behind me. This meant only one thing. The current had turned at right angles with the sweep of the shoreline, and now both the coracle and the Hispaniola, far from going ashore, were being swept out to sea at a very fast rate. Holding on for my very life, I lay flat in the small boat as it charged along, the current ever quickening, ever bubbling higher, ever muttering louder. Then, at last, I was on the open sea, where the heavy waves hurled their flying spray all over me. I became wet, numb, and very weary. And so it was that I fell into a cold, exhausted sleep. And in my storm-tossed coracle, I lay and dreamed of home and the old Admiral Benbow. It was broad daylight when I awoke and found myself riding a heavy swell at the southwest corner of Treasure Island. I was scarce a quarter of a mile to seaward, and it was my first thought to paddle in and land. But that notion was soon given over. Among the fallen rocks, the breakers spouted and bellowed. Loud reverberations succeeded one another from second to second, and I saw myself, if I ventured nearer, being dashed to death upon the rough shore. There seemed nothing I could do. So lying low, I let the boat run through the great smooth waves, which seemed like mountains. And indeed, she proved a very buoyant little craft. And so the hours passed by. I'd eaten the last of my biscuits and was tortured with thirst. The glow of the sun from above and the seawater that caked my lips with salt combined to make my throat burn and my brain ache. But then, as the coracle was swept upwards on a wave, I beheld a sight that changed the nature of my thoughts. Right in front of me, not half a mile away, I beheld the Hispaniola. She was under her mainsail and two jibs, and the beautiful white canvas shone in the sun like snow or silver. But she was behaving in a most curious way. She fell right into the wind's eye, was taken dead aback, and stood there a while helpless with her sails shivering. Clumsy fellows, I thought. They must still be as drunk as owls. How Captain Smollett would have sent them skipping. Meanwhile, the schooner gradually fell off and filled again upon another tack, sailed swiftly for a minute or so, and brought up once more dead in the wind's eye. Again and again this was repeated, to and fro, up and down, and it became clear to me that nobody was steering. So where were the crew? Either they were dead drunk or had deserted her, I thought, and perhaps if I could get on board, I might return the vessel to her captain. The Hispaniola still swooped up and down, out of control on different tacks, but gradually the distance between us lessened. Then, all of a sudden, she was close by and heading towards me. I could see the waves boiling white under her forefoot, and she looked immensely tall from my low station in the coracle. I had scarce time to think, scarce time to act and save myself. As the bowsprit was over my head, I sprang to my feet and leapt upwards, stamping the coracle under the water. With both hands, I held onto the bobstay for all I was worth, as a dull blow told me the schooner had struck the coracle, and I was left without retreat on the Hispaniola. I would not have survived long hanging onto the bobstay in that rough sea, so quickly I crawled onto the bowsprit, then safely made the deck. It was plain to see now that the ship was quite out of control and at the mercy of the wind. And no wonder, for there were only two men aboard. One lay dead on his back, as stiff as a handspike, arms outstretched. The other was the coxswain, Israel Hands. Propped against the bulwarks, chin on chest, his face was as white as a tallow candle. Around them both on the deck were broken bottles and splashes of dark blood. "Come aboard, Mr. Hands," I said ironically. Slowly he opened his eyes, but said not a word. A bottle of brandy stood beside him, so I forced some between his lips, and he revived somewhat. "I've taken possession of this ship, Mr. Hands, so God save the King, and an end to Long John Silver." Again, the coxswain made no reply. "Right, you'll listen to me, Mr. Hands, and please regard me as captain. Now we'll make a deal. You tell me how to sail this ship, and I'll tend to your wounds."
All right, Captain Hawkins. It seems I have no choice, so I must accept.
And that is how I took command of the Hispaniola. Israel Hands was as good as his word, and soon I had her sailing easily before the wind along the coast of Treasure Island. I'd eaten well from the supplies aboard, taken down that cursed black flag, and now stood as proud as Punch by the tiller, greatly elated with my new command. My intention now was to beach the ship at North Inlet, a remote spot on the island where Silver's men would never find her, and then to rescue the beleaguered party from the stockade. Several hours later, however, as we entered the calm waters of the inlet, trouble came from an unexpected quarter. Throughout the morning, Israel Hands had sat propped against the bulwarks, seemingly too ill to move. Perhaps it was a creep, or a shadow seen with the tail of my eye. Whatever it was, it caused me to turn. And there he was, but a few feet from me, a bloody dirk in his hand. As he came towards me, I backed away. Then, pulling out a pistol, I aimed and squeezed the trigger. But nothing happened. The priming was useless with seawater. Once more the coxswain came for me, but I was saved by the ship. At that moment she hit the beach, and I fell with Hands alongside the dead pirate. But the ship was now canting to one side, and the deck no place to stay and fight, so I leapt into the mizzen shrouds, rattled up hand over hand, and did not draw breath until I was seated on the main top. I had obviously underrated the coxswain's strength and cunning. Wounded he was, but not that badly. Slowly he climbed the shrouds after me, breathing heavily and holding the dirk in his teeth. But by now I was ready for him with both pistols primed. "You may have taken one life aboard this ship, Mr. Hands, but not another. One more step and I'll blow your brains out." He stopped instantly, looking up at the two pistols. Then, taking the dagger from his mouth, he called out,
Jim, I reckon we're fouled, you and me, and we'll have to sign articles. I'd have had you but for that there lurch, but I don't have no luck, not I. So I give in. But it comes hard, I tell you, for a master mariner, and you just a boy.
I drank in his words and smiled away as conceited as a cock upon a wall. When all in a breath, back went his right hand over his shoulder, and something sang like an arrow through the air. I felt a blow and a sharp pain in my shoulder, and there I was, pinned to the mast by the dagger. Without conscious aim or effort, both my pistols went off and fell from my hands. They did not fall alone. With a choked cry, the coxswain dropped from the shrouds and plunged head first into the water. I now felt faint and sick, and blood ran freely down my shirt from the wound. And then, stupidly, I glanced below me. There on the sand, under several feet of water, lay the body of Israel Hands. It all seemed like some dreadful nightmare, as his arms waved slowly with the movement of the water. Then came the mist before my eyes. The whole scene blurred before me, and I passed out.